Three ball from CG43. They're in front.
This is flat out ridiculous.
From a beautiful left hand, in and out finish, the old-fashioned way.
Newell gets to the basket with one to come. From there again. You have got to be kidding me. Tyson step, wraps it up.
Hello everybody, welcome back. NBL Pocket Podcast, recording this on, Monday, 23rd of February. We've just seen the Ignite Cup. More importantly, what are we talking about on this episode? We're going to be talking about the awards. We're going to be doing a breakout on Melbourne and Adelaide. We're going to be doing something racial, or maybe even racist. You'll have to be the judge of that. And then we're talking about the Ignite Cup. All funny stuff. Before we do that, welcome to the show. The last episode number 285 for the NBL Pocket Podcast, got 406 downloads, which, to be honest, is where we were at. When Ken and I were doing more episodes, we'd get maybe around 1,000, more like 750. But to know that there's still 400 people plus listening to these episodes, there's a lot of lonely people out there, and I feel bad for you, but I feel good that you're here on the NBL Pocket Podcast. No Canyon this week. He may or may not be back in the future. The shows are better with Canyon, but we got to press on. We got to put out some episodes. I think we've only put out 5 this year, but anyway, let's start with the NBL Awards. Now, I've done something differently here. The awards are going to be later today, but what I thought I'd do is I'm going to give who I think should be second in line for each award and who I think should be last. Does that make sense? I'm not going to give you, or I might whisper at the end, who I think should win these awards, but I'm actually going to tell you who's going to be second in place for each award, and then who I think is the least deserving of the nominated players. So let's do this. Let's start with the MVP. I've got second as Kendrick Davis. And why I say that is because Davis has had a hell of a year, but the first half of the year was a bit shaky. He is the best player on the best team, but I still think that the winner of this award had a really consistent year and made a lot of people a lot better. And I don't think that the person who I think should win the MVP has as good a roster as Davis has around him. I think Dellavedova has been miraculous for Davis's career. It's hard to really see it game to game, but I think the results are there. Can I give honourable mention? I almost gave it to Cooks. I don't think he's better than Davis, hasn't had the better year than Davis, but I think Cooks is one of the most impactful players in the NBL. But we'll talk about that some other time, or maybe later in the pod. The least deserving on the MVP list, I've got JaVale McGee of Illawarra. Great numbers. I think he is the PER leader this year in the NBL. But I've seen very little team improvement. There was also the rumours early on in the year, not rumours, publicated stuff that, there was fracture in that locker room between he and Dave Hickey. Whoever was the instigator of that, I don't know, but typically it's, when there's fighting, it's normally 2 parties going at it or more. And then also the impact on the record hasn't been good. Illawarra this season are the ultimate case study in when your owners piss off the owners of the league. And the way that the league has put them under schedule pressure, TV pressure, financial pressure, everything is a real case study in an absolute... It's almost like Kennedy versus Khrushchev missile crisis. The level of arms race and the horrible arm wrestle that's going on between Illawarra and the league. And I think Illawarra are going to come off second best because their stadium holds, 14 people and they're a small team. I'm digressing from the MVP award, but that's who I think is second in line and who I think is least deserving. Moving on to most improved. I've got second, most improved. Now, I want to give my definition. I think it's more exciting when a player goes from, okay player to a star. That's real improvement. To go from a player who doesn't get any minutes to then does get minutes and stats in those minutes, that's impressive, but not what I look for in this award. I want to look for a guy who improves in the same amount of minutes or maybe a little bit more or a new role. That to me is most improved. But with that in mind, second, I've got the kid from Sydney, Mullawatch. He has gone from deep on the bench DP to a really impactful wing player in the NBL. He I don't know what his contract situation is, but he's done himself all kinds of favours. In so far as I think he's a better player than Bull Quo, or arguably in the same conversation. And we wouldn't be having this conversation about him like that early on in the year. So he's who I've got coming second in the MVP most improved race. Least deserving, I've got Marshall. Hard one to give. I thought he had a good year too, but he's had performance pops, certainly late as their season became less relevant, but not the sample size that we needed from him. Sixth man, I've got Kawat Noi as coming second in this race. I realised I didn't put who I thought was least deserving for sixth man. But anyway, Noi, he's had 6 big games, and in those 6 big games, 5 of them have been wins, and 4 were against either good teams or road teams. And, in a 30-some game season, 6 big games off your bench, and then a couple of sort of mid games to quite good performances, that's enough to get you second in this award. I will actually go into who I think should win this award, and I think it's Nick Rakocevic of the Adelaide 36ers. He's got the best PER of any player off the bench, but numbers don't always speak volumes. But I just think he's been amazing. Points, rebounds, tough inside. I can't speak for the defense, what it's like with him on the floor, but every time I watch a game with Adelaide, he's always involved, and more so than their starting centre. Defensive Player of the Year. Moving on, and I'm sorry that I don't have the list of players who are actually nominated for these awards. This podcast isn't all-inclusive. This is like a video game on MS-DOS. You have to have like grid paper next to you when you're listening to this. So for the Defensive Player of the Year, I've got coming up in runners-up spot in this award, I've got Xavier Cooks. Second best defensive rating on this list of nominees, only behind Will Magnay. And who I've got least deserving is Will Magnay, because he only played in 24 games. And for me, 24 of a possible 33, that's almost a third of the season he's missing. And unfortunately, it's become quite common for Will Magnay to miss that amount of time. So for me, that just kind of rules you ineligible. I don't know what 9 of 33 is. But I think that would almost make you ineligible for NBA awards as well. So if you use that criteria, for that reason, I've got Will Magnay as the least deserving defensive player nominee. Moving on. Next Star Award, I think we call it, or Next Gen. I don't know. It changes every year. This is the best talent under 25 for those playing at home. Second, I've got the kid from the Breakers who had a really strong end of the year, and I think has been one of the best candidates to come out of the Next Star program in a long time. This kid is big. He is strong from New Zealand. I've got the kid Karim Lopez. Scored over 15 points 10 times, and New Zealand went 8-2 in those games. Can't comment to the competition. But when he scored under 10 points, New Zealand went 1-10. So he was a huge part of what they did. Now, that's a bit of a condemnation that he scored under 10 points 11 times, but it just showed that when he was impactful, he helped this team win. And LaMelo Ball didn't do that. Josh Giddey didn't do that. I can't think of another Next Star who kind of had that impact. I actually like the kid down in Southeast Melbourne as a Next Star as well, but I digress. Least deserving, I've got Galloway from the Kings. In an 8-minute per game jump, he's gone from 5.4 points per game to 9.1 on 42%. And he's down in free throw attempts per game. So after the Asia Cup, I think we all had pretty high expectations. He's still been nominated for this award, I think, because the criteria rules out a lot of people, and it just hasn't happened for him. So I'm out on that. Coach, the runner-up in the Coach of the Year, I've got as Josh King, the coach of Southeast Melbourne. They finished third on the ladder, 22 wins, 11 losses. The roster doesn't hugely jump out on paper. I don't think anyone had this team particularly highly rated. He's had huge improvers in Foxwell, Glover, and Hunter. And then he's got a lot out of his Next Star, who I was talking about before, the kid Lewis. Marquise Lewis? Can't remember. he doesn't have huge numbers and kind of fades in games, but he gives them a punch every now and again and never plays outside of himself. You can't hate this team. I think they're really good. The least deserving for Coach of the Year. Let's say because all coaches are eligible for Coach of the Year, so it might be a roughie, but you could put a few bucks on Stu Lash. It could be his year. Least deserving, and let's rule out the non-playoff coaches, so Roth is out of the question, although I thought he did a lot with a lot of injuries. And, New Zealand's coach and so on and so forth. So really it just comes down to, well, it's not who I have winning this award. It's out of Wells, Riley, and Vickerman. And let's do a little bit of a breakdown on it. Let's start with Vickerman. No, actually, let's start with Wells. Boy, that Ignite Cup game had some funky lineups. He loves Isaac White and a bit of Matt Kenyon time. I think it may have cost him $300,000. But you look at the knock on Wells, 6 losses in the last 10. I think they're finishing the year 4-6. And I think I saw a stat online, and if I've stolen this from someone on Twitter, I really wish I could credit you, but I've long forgotten who put it up, but fair play to whoever did. I don't think a team in the top 4 has put up as bad as a last 10 run into the playoffs as this team and then gone on to win. I think the worst performing team in their last 10 games to then go on and be of any credit in the finals was 5-5 or 6-4 type thing. They just look so, I wouldn't say bad, more vulnerable. They just look so vulnerable where Humphreys can get picked on. They go to these small lineups that get picked on. Matt Kenyon's out there for a lot of minutes and teams just invite him to shoot. As I say, the word I'm going to use is vulnerable. And Wells seems erratic and getting in Riley's face, and the cracks are starting to show and people are attacking the cracks. They have not been the same since they hit a bit of a losing streak, and then all those rumours about an internal meeting and all that sort of stuff. And they have been, Wells in particular, has been totally fractured by that. Because the rumours are true, that meeting happened. If people were wondering at home, it happened, and it's kind of like the lady doth protest too much. When they came out and tried to sue Bogut and everything, you knew it was true. And I've spoken to people, and people have sent me messages, so it definitely happened. And they are just breaking down from there, and all the good work they did all year. They should have just ignored it and kept going, but it's totally in their head. So that's the knock on Wells as to why he shouldn't win the award despite finishing second on the year. John Riley. Sometimes I would call him Rabble Riley because the team, how many 1-point losses did they have? 4 throughout the year. Not a good sign. I think that would set a record for the most amount of 1-point losses by a team in an NBL season, regardless of the game tally. Also, the point tallies vary wildly, but I can't give him the least deserving on this list because their record is fine. JLA has been very, very small. Really has not worked out how to work out JLA, but I don't think it's totally on the coach on that one. But in fairness to Riley, I think they're the number 1 defensive rated team in the NBL, Perth, or at least were when I last checked. So that's a tick. It was a bad look when Sydney was sort of running up a points tally, like this team was a last team in the league or the second worst team in the league, and Sydney were just sort of, we're going to win by 20 or 30. And I know that was a game in which Henschel and Windler missed, but I just thought if you're so dependent on talent at this point, if your team doesn't know where to kind of get points and it's not a next guy up situation, I had no doubt that we're going to lose that game. But to lose it like that and just be such a rabble that teams are able to just run up a score on you, even one as good as Sydney, and now you're going to, face them in the finals and beat them? Give me a break. So that's the knock on Riley. Here's the knock on Vickerman, and after this we're going to do a bit of a breakout on Melbourne United, but I will whisper to you who I think will win the awards. Vickerman, the knock on him as to why he's the least deserving Coach of the Year candidate inside the play-in eligible teams. They had a 9-game win streak to start the season, and that was impressive. We all loved it. Illy goes down, and I think Illy has played just 10 games this season. And without him and Dellavedova, this team's just gone completely to crumble. They've gone to crumble. They've just completely crumbled. And I think you look at their roster, and I won't talk about it too much, but yeah, that's the knock on Vickerman. But you actually look at their games, and they have lost to a lot of teams by small margins. They haven't really dropped to many of the bad teams. They've just been beaten by teams who aren't hurt. Walker's been hurt and had a really bad slump, so there are some excuses for Vickerman. So for me, the least deserving for Coach of the Year is Wells. That's my final answer. But let's do a Melbourne United breakout. But before we do that, I will give you who I think should win the awards, and I'll whisper it quietly. I think Bryce Cotton should win the MVP. But if Davis won it, that would not be an injustice. I think Sam Menenga is the most improved player because, as I say, I like a role player who goes to a star, and Menenga may be one of the best bigs in the NBL. Rather than that kind of he's better than JLA this year for sure. Way tougher, way stronger. Perth would be a better team with Menenga. He's just gone from a role player to he won't be back in the NBL because he'll be poached by Japan or somewhere that pays a lot more. I have Rakocevic for sixth man. I mentioned that. John Brown third for Defensive Player of the Year. Allowed to foul a great deal, but honestly, if this award went to Cooks can switch 1 through 5. Brown can kind of do that, but not to the same degree. I think Cooks has been incredible this year. And then next star, I've also got Menenga. You don't go from being a good player at Cairns to then an absolute. I think he's a star. I think he's going to be in one of the All NBL teams. So for that reason, I have him as the next star. And then Coach of the Year, I think, has to go to Brian Goorjian. What are they on, a 13-game win streak to end the year or something ridiculous? And they're smoking teams. And then they signed Torrey Craig. I don't think Kings ownership will be coming out at the end of the year being like, we don't overpay the cap and ... I'm like, They were a good team, and then they stacked the deck with Torrey Craig. I don't know how they can lose it from here, but I'm off track. They're my winners. Melbourne United. We need to talk about this team because this is a team that had high hopes at the start of the year, first couple of months of the season, and have now dropped off to where they are middle of the road. Looking at them, they are 11-6 at home. No problem there. The problem is when they get on the road, they're 9-7, which is an average record for where they sit on the table. It's not too bad, but as I say, this is Melbourne United. They should not be in the bottom four. They should not be in the top four. Illawarra and Tasmania were middling teams that gave them huge trouble. I don't have their records, I'm afraid, but I think against those teams they may have a losing record or have broken even when they really should have walloped Illawarra and they should have walloped Tasmania. But Roth just owns Vickerman at this point. That he may as well wear a collar and leash with Scott Roth's initials on it. Vickerman should. It's just an ownage. They suffered losses to Cairns by 1 and New Zealand by 2. If they get those, their record's a bit different. They're up the tally. They're in the 4. I think the problems, as I see it with Melbourne United, is there's no bench. Especially in the last game of the year they played where they lost to whoever they did. I can't remember. Other than Doyle, who's been forced to come off the bench to give them something, because Golding doesn't really like to do it or can't, I don't know. And it should probably be Golding coming off the bench, but they just have no bench, no dynamism off the bench. And then there's no length and athleticism on the roster outside of Edwards. And especially not on the wing now that Dash Daniels has dropped off, who at 18 came in with a lot of hype, a lot of promise. And, I think a lot of these guys who are being bred, Australian guys being bred for the NBA, come in with this. They're with a powerful agency that just kind of pushed the narrative. But now I don't think the polish is worn off, and we can see Dash Daniels for the 18-year-old who can't shoot outside the keyway that he always was. Still a handsome player and capable and stuff, but it's all way too much, way too soon at 18 years old in the NBL. Taz and Roth are such a doozy for Melbourne. They split the record against Tasmania when Tasmania had way worse injuries and so on and so forth. And I will say that 6 of their first 9, Melbourne, their winning streak, came against what have eventuated to be non-finals teams. So that's 6 of their first 9. When Cairns had massive injuries and Illawarra had people out and so on and so forth. So they're not good. The question is, were they ever good? And I like their roster coming in, but their roster coming in hasn't been the roster that's worked out. They needed Illy to be healthy. That was their gamble. Every NBL team, the way that money works and the structure of rosters, has to take a risk, and they took a risk on Illy, and talk about your all-time backfires. It just hasn't worked. He's missed so many games, and without him they lose so much toughness, so much of their identity, and it's kind of over. And then the other one is Finn Delaney. It just hasn't been. I thought he was going to have a real solid year, and he's been up and down. They took 2 risks on those 2 guys, and they haven't excelled beyond what was going to be probably worst case scenario / mediocre output from those. That's it. You take some risks in life, and they did their darndest and they didn't pay off. Moving on, people who are fans of the NBA, and more accurately people who are fans of Bill Simmons and his podcast, would have seen that he and a guy, I believe the name of Nick Wright, were throwing around ideas as to how to fix the All Star Game. And one of the it was sort of put out there to be silly, or to be a little bit kind of attention grabbing. One of the solutions they put forward was the NBA should do a black players versus white players. Now, if this is not your jam, people, and you think this is rude or un-PC, you're welcome to tune out now, and don't call the police. I tell you what, there's a problem here. You can take it out of my paycheck. This podcast makes like $50 a month through Patreon. You can have it all. So I thought, let's have a look at the NBL and do this on separate lines. So I'm trying to think of polite ways to name these teams. Anyway, on one team, I've got Cotton, Davis, Hamilton, Doolittle, and McGee. And for the white boys, I've got Sobey, McVeigh, Menenga, Golding, and Windler. Off the bench, I've got Prather, but because he's hurt, it's an all-star game, he gets replaced by Parker Jackson Cartwright. Doyle, this is where it gets nerve-wracking. I've got Cooks. Does he qualify? I think so. Brown the third, and then Jesse Edwards. Again, we're getting poor. Everything's a spectrum. Off the bench for the sunscreeners, I've got Magnay, Dellavedova, Jaron Riley, Bannon, and Glover. I dare you people out there, NBL Pocketeers, I dare you to go out there and on Twitter, you put up your own teams under these categories. You know what the categories are. You do that. I dare you, okay? I dare you. We're at 22 minutes. We're going to wrap this up in about 5. Ignite Cup thoughts of the final and in general. Well, first year of the Ignite Cup, I think you can say the final was great. Not the most poised down the stretch from either team, but it was an entertaining fixture. Gold Coast, I only watched it on television, so I can't comment how many people were there and whether it was, you'd look at that game and go, oh, we should, expand again into the Gold Coast for what is now, a third time? There's Gold Coast Rollers, Gold Coast Suns, Gold Coast Blaze. Is there a Suns? No, that's the football team. But there's definitely been 2, Rollers and Blaze. So I can't comment on all that, but I did see a bit of chatter on Twitter that the game was pretty hollow when there, but it actually looked to be going mental on the sidelines on the telecast, but maybe they were faking it. It's hard to tell. But from a TV perspective, it gets a thumbs up. I thought New Zealand lacked so much late game pause, and that comes down to their coach, and that's been them all year, where I thought their roster was going to be better than they were, and they got smashed in some games and looked terrible and got better and actually had a pretty strong end of the year, not just in this final where they took away the money. Adelaide, to give you the basics, Cotton had 34 and 9 assists, Rakocevic 21 and 11 rebounds, Cheatham had 21 points. Here's the knock on Adelaide, and this is kind of an extension of what we were talking about before, and actually preempts another podcast I'm going to do in a couple of days and weeks, where we give finals impressions and also look back at the over-unders that we did at the start of the year. There's not a lot to Cheatham's game, and I know I feel bad criticising a guy who had 21 points because he jumped off the box stat, but there was a point late in the game where he set the screen. Humphreys was off the court, and Humphreys has done pretty well kind of making decisions off the bounce when he's on the pick and roll. But Cheatham caught at the foul line, and you could tell he didn't have the dunk on, didn't have the jump shot, went to a push shot, and it was just never there. And it was late. It was kind of a very critical point, and Cheatham is a hell of an athlete and a huge body and a great presence. But when you're coming down to these finite games, I have my doubts. So, and then Humphries, 20 minutes, and his numbers and minutes have dropped. He started the year as averaging around sort of high 20s, sometimes as high as 30 minutes, pardon me. He was doing well. He's dropped off. I sense a certain fragility. I remember last season Humphries giving a really candid, I wouldn't say criticism, but certainly critique of the Adelaide season and how traumatic it was. And he's very seemingly very thoughtful in that interview, so maybe that casts along, but has just seemed fragile. And that was the knock on him at Sydney before he went off to the NBA. But this is now, sort of a wishy-washy year. And his numbers have been good, but I don't know, just not for me. But more the point, the Humphries conversation is they've doubled up on this position. They have Humphries and Rakocevic, both guys, big lumbering tall guys who can't really they don't give you a lot of dynamism defending. And you can't really go inside outside. They are big post catchers, offensive rebounding and roll off the pick and roll players, but not a lob threat like a Cheatham or Jesse Edwards at Melbourne. So they've doubled up on this position. They've doubled up on the spend, and as a result, you can tell they totally lack anything on the wing, and that's why Wells is searching with these funky small lineups, which I would have thought he would have given up on by now. But outside of Flynn Cameron, there's just not, and all the imports they brought in haven't quite filled the bill. From Brown to Jenkins is still finding his feet. It's kind of too late for him to be really impactful unless you're a Torrey Craig superstar. So, we talk about the gambles you make at the start of the year, and that was one. They just haven't got the wing depth that they need at all from a local or an import standpoint. So I think it's really going to cost them in the playoffs because, they just not good. And then Vasiljevic in this game had 28 minutes, 6 points, 25% from the field, 0 free throw attempts. So there's no attack at the basket. He doesn't know his role, and his role's he's been jerked around. He's almost like a cartoon character standing on a rug that's just been pulled, and he's just gone head over heels. He's now been under double figures in 4 of his last 5, and not to discredit his game, but if he's not scoring and being a real drag defenders out, 3-point threat, after that Achilles injury, he's still got a bit of bounce, but that's not his game to really super attack the cup and pitch and ditch. Ditch and pitch? Drive and dish? Whatever. That's never been a huge part of his game. So if he's not a massive 3-point threat, and Wells has never worked him out. And Vasiljevic this year kind of reminds me of Trey Kell in Southeast Melbourne. The role ain't right, and the player who's got a lot of skill is adrift. So that's on the player, but that's also on the coach. This is a business. This is a workplace relationship thing, and you want players with talent who get put in the right position, and it hasn't happened in Adelaide. And I don't know if Wells has got another year left, but if they're thinking about getting him at mid-season, I don't think he survives the off-season. This was going back to the knock on Wells when we talked about Coach of the Year. Cotton has not got any rest. Other than sitting out the game before, his minutes per game are up on really from last year. And that was a season in which we played 5 less games. A 28-game season, now it's 33, so 5 less games. His minutes are way up. He did sit the 1 game. But what that tells me is Wells has just figured out nothing for these other how many guys on the roster, and he's got no bench team whatsoever. And if Cotton's not driving this team, there's just so little that Wells has manufactured around him. And that was one thing about Gleeson in the Wildcats with Cotton. A lot of people kiss Gleeson's ass, but I'm going to be another one to do it. He played Cotton a lot, no doubt about it, but there was no coach who went, this is a star player, this is a special talent, I'm going to maximize everything about this guy's game. And he ran him off funky picks that looked dated, but it worked for Cotton and it worked for the team. And Gleeson was actually able to find him rest. Really wasn't able to do it. And now Wells certainly hasn't been able to do it. And it is a bit of a condemnation of these coaches. What have I got here? Yeah, and that's what I've got on that. But yeah, New Zealand took away the 300,000. I hope I'm saying that right. And then Adelaide take away, 100K? I could be way off about that. But anyway, whatever the money is, what I wanted to think about is, all right, so New Zealand would have been saying to Adelaide players at the end of the game, hey, we won the money, F you. And Adelaide would be saying, well, we're in the finals and the playoffs and we've got more games coming up and you don't, F you. Slight breakaway here. Gorgon telling Foxwell, shut the fuck up, I'm not talking to you, bitch. Incredible television, incredible. So both would have been jawing at each other. And my question is to people out there, who's making more money as an individual player? So obviously New Zealand get the 300K and it's divided amongst all those players. So it goes between 10 players, 30 grand each. Maybe the staff get a bit and da-da. So, you're probably getting change from, 20 grand or whatever. Would playoff game payments be more than that 20 grand? You know what I mean? So let's say you're someone like, let's say you're sitting in Perth and you're not part of the Ignite Cup. Would you rather play a 5-game final series and get game payments from them? And would that be more than winning the Ignite Cup? Question for the sort of GM people out there. Get back to me at NBL Pocket Pod on Twitter. Looking at the Ignite Cup broadly, and we've chatted about this in the past, attendances were down this year for the NBL. I think down by about sort of between 5 and 10%. And I should have written it down, but go to NBL Facts or Statman, I think, put something out about how attendances are down. And I think you can draw a direct correlation in those attendances being down to the greater number of midweek games we've had. And that's not a knock on the NBL or its players and the quality of competition. That's just a life thing where people in this country don't want to go to games on a Wednesday night, especially in Perth where it's earlier, East Coast. It's just a rabble, and games started early and you're getting home from work, or people don't want to do it. And then it's not included in the membership. So that was something that the league, I wouldn't be at all surprised, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but the Ignite Cup was a smack on the snout for every team to say, like, hey, if we want to do some bogus fucking tournament and spring it on you at the last minute and it has no TV money coming in, and we're going to force you to book out Win Arena and get 2,500 people there, and you're going to absolutely eat your lunch financially, we'll do it. So do what we say, bitch. I'm probably going a bit too hard there, sorry, but I'm not talking to you, bitch. They do some crazy stuff. So yeah, and how the Ignite Cup could have been a winner for Illawarra all the way through, unless they'd won it. Anyway, and then the question I've always had is no TV deal. I actually think the Ignite Cup as a TV product would have been awesome. You're pitching a network, be it free-to-air or a streamer, and say, hey, because I don't think ESPN would have paid more money for the right. I don't know how this TV deal works, but imagine it was free-to-air. Okay, Wednesday at whatever time, put up the money. I don't know. My question with the NBL when it talks about its entertainment packages, which are really behind the ball, what was the sales pitch? If the pitch was, hey, Channel 7, you should stream the Ignite Cup because 1 million people play basketball once a week. If you're using those boring stats that ChatGPT spits out, you're doing it all wrong. You're pitching a TV show which is, hey, cheap to produce because we produce all the, they get the in-house NBL media to make it. You get the end product. It's made. It's 2 hours of GTV, which free-to-air TVs has to have a certain amount of G-rated content. It's a easily understood sport. Put ball in hole. Don't turn it over. And the outcome is unknown. You're talking about a TV show with a cliffhanger for 39 minutes, and then you get your result in the last minute. If you're not pitching it like that and packaging it nicely, you're fucking up. And maybe they pitched it well, maybe they didn't, maybe they didn't care. It's hard to tell. Guys, ladies, gentlemen, girls, boys, friends, comrades, we have come to the end of our program at 34 minutes. I spoke that whole time. If you're still around for the end of it, thanks very much. We'll be coming out next week. I'm hoping to do some episodes with obviously Canyon. Might get Body Notch from the Body and Joey show, Time Out, onto the program to have a chat about the year. That's been a great show. I want to give a couple of shout outs before I jump off this thing. I should have done it at the start. There is an Instagram, Twitter account, and all that you should definitely follow. This kid is called, 2 moments, it's not NBL related, but it's basketball. This guy is called Hoop After Work. He's got just over 9,000 followers on a few platforms. It's just about a guy, I believe in Sydney, who is chronicling, documenting his return to basketball now that he works 9 to 5. And I want to give him a good shout out for 2 things. Number 1, he recommended a pair of socks. And I know about everyone has already tuned out of the pod at this point when you start talking about socks, but I've got the reel here. Better than Nike Elite socks. And it talks about an Australian brand of socks called Rebounds. And these things are terrific. I bought a pair, and they're not a cure for plantar fasciitis. They're not a cure for Achilles tendinopathy, but gee, they're a good sock. They're $25 a piece, so they probably should be, but they're a bit spenny, but gee, you get what you pay for. I think they're terrific. Also, this account, I follow it, and the guy does really good work. Nice little videos, having fun with basketball. Again, not NBL related, but if you're in the space, you probably dig it. So yeah, Hoop After Work. Go and check him out. And Hoop After Work, if you're listening, you're probably not, but if you are, hit us up. Might get you on the pod to spruik your wares and sell your shit. Or the other thing he did that was good was, I believe he's signed up to some sort of elite basketball training center here in Sydney, and he's paying a certain amount of cash per week, and the place didn't put up shit. I didn't fix it, had broken this and no nets. I mean, if you go to a basketball center and there's broken nets and you're paying any amount of money, that's inexcusable. And he called them out, and hopefully things are fixed now. But so it's an account that actually isn't afraid to it's not just spruiking stuff. He'll say this is good, this is bad, but always in celebration of the game. So I just got 2 thumbs up for Hoop After Work. Anyway, guys, that's it. I'll have another pod soon enough. Just looking forward to the finals, and maybe even wrapping up the finals and what's been another season of NBL Pocket Pod. Guys, have a good one. Bye.